Hello, I'm Chris Flisher, and welcome to Turning of the Wheel, an intelligent, lively discussion on astrology, art, and adventure. Timing is everything, and as the great wheel turns, we are best prepared when we are best informed. Join me as I explore the current planetary alignments and offer insights for coping with change. Educational, informative, enlightening, the Turning of the Wheel is a welcome pause in your daily swirl of constant change. Through intelligent discourse, inspired guests, and educational segments, I will help to enlighten your knowledge of astrology and guide you to accept change as the great wheel of life turns. Call in with your questions and speak with some of the greatest visionaries in the time-tested practice of astrology. Turning of the Wheel, Astrology, Art, and Adventure with Chris Flisher, each week on Turning of the Wheel podcast. Okay, welcome to Turning the Wheel. My name is Chris Flisher. As you know, this is a show about astrology, art, and spiritual adventure. And spiritual adventure allows me to cast a very wide net into lots of esoteric topics, which I love to delve into because they are fascinating to me. We'll have a great guest coming on in a few seconds. Before we do, I want to remind you of my newsletter, which comes out every Sunday afternoon. In there, I do a couple paragraphs of mundane astrology, so it applies to all of us out there in the world, and then I break it out into individual signs. I encourage you to read your sun sign and your rising sign both each week and put the two together to get a more accurate depiction of what will happen in your week to come. It's widely popular and it has got a great reach to it, so I encourage you to delve into that. So without any further ado, I want to get on my guest. As I mentioned, I like to be able to sort of cast my net widely with regard to topics and subjects, and that allows me to enter into the world of the esoteric arts and the occult and everything else that has to do with that. My guest today is someone I met years ago. I had her on a show with my wife at the time, when I was married, and we had discussed her book about 5,000 fantastic encyclopedia of 5,000 spells, which was sort of like an encyclopedia of witchcraft also. And she's also written an encyclopedia of spirits. So she's widely versed and well-versed in all of the esoteric arts. Her name is Judika Illes, and she's joining me today to discuss her latest book called Occult Detectives, 13 Stories of Supernatural Sleuthing. So welcome to the show, Judika.
Thank you, Chris. I'm always happy to speak with you.
Yeah, it's great to have you on. So this is interesting. This is sort of like a continuation or not of your last thing, the Fantastic and Forgotten sort of collection that you had done?
Yeah, I mean, it's the same genre. They stand alone. They're both collections of vintage esoteric fiction. And this book actually came out of the earlier book. The earlier book was called The Wiser Book of the Fantastic and Forgotten.
Mm-hmm.
And as I was compiling stories, and I choose the stories and I write the introductions. And as I was choosing the stories for that one, it struck me how many really good occult detective stories there are. And there actually are two in Fantastic and Forgotten. And then when I got to another story, Helena Blavatsky's Cave of the Echoes,
yeah,
I thought, this book deserves, this topic deserves a book of its own. And I reserved that one in the hopes that I would be able to write it. And I was lucky enough that it happened because, sometimes you have thoughts for books and they don't actually, or they haven't had the opportunity yet to materialize.
Right. I was surprised by her entry the most because I know her as the great theosophical, sort of guiding light. And I know she was very heavily involved in the occult and lots of esoteric arts. But I was surprised to see her in this form because this is obviously, a fiction form where she has always written nonfiction or been, expository writing. So it's interesting.
Helena Blavatsky is a character.
Oh, she
is. And I think, this many years after her death, we see her as this serious, either people see her as a charlatan, which is a whole other story,
right.
which I don't, but or they see her as this very serious figure, the mother of the New Age, the co-founder of Theosophy, and she's written these huge tomes and talks about ascended masters. But Helena Blavatsky had this amazing career. She was a bareback writer. She worked as a lady's companion. She traveled around the world by herself, and I think sometimes was very much in need of a job, of money. She arrived in the U.S. with literally nothing. She had spent everything on the passage over and was working in a sweatshop in New York when she first got to America. I think putting together purses or pen wipers or some such thing. She's a very interesting person, and she did write fiction and horror fiction, and it was after her death, and I don't know whether she would have, I haven't read the newer biographies of her, and I don't know whether she was pleased with this or not, that the Theosophical Society put out a book called Nightmare Tales, which includes various short stories that she wrote. There's one, The Haunted Violin, which I write about in my book, The Encyclopedia of Witchcraft. But Cave of the Echoes, she claimed, was based on a true story. One of her relatives was apparently, and I don't want to give away the story because it's a fun story.
Yeah.
It's a murder mystery, and she claimed that one of her relatives actually was a witness to the denouement, to the shaman's reveal of the murderer. And, I hope so. I hope it's a real story.
Yeah.
It's a great story.
She's such a colorful character in herself. It's just an incredibly, almost indescribable human being who just explored and was so
really
out
larger
there.
Than life.
Yeah, larger than life, exactly. And she had many odd traits and characteristics, but she did bring a lot to the public discourse with regard to what she sort of unveiled in her writings and her quest, I think, to sort of fuse all of these esoteric arts together into one cohesive sort of philosophy, for lack of a better word.
Well, and it's very possible that this knowledge would have arrived in the West via other means. I think knowledge sort of has a life of its own, but if you use terms like karma,
right,
or discuss reincarnation.
Exactly, yeah.
Helena Blavatsky is really the person who brings it from the East to the West and makes it accessible.
Yeah.
To, her books were bestsellers.
Yeah, she really was quite an outlier in that regard. There were other people who were trying to legitimize it at the same time. I know that Carl Jung, maybe shortly after, had sort of put a stamp of approval on many of the things, although he wasn't as well received either. So, but he did sort of cast that, academic glance that way, which sort of legitimized many of the things that she was discussing in some capacity.
I think Helena Blavatsky, she was very well educated, and she, came from, an intelligentsia background.
Yeah.
But she was also somebody who was, kind of salt of the earth. Very, she went through periods of not having money. She traveled by herself as a woman in places
she
where...
She smoked cigars and...
she smoked cigars, yeah.
She was quite a character.
And I think she was somebody who, they have these Facebook memes periodically, if you could have any 12 people to a dinner party, who would you invite? Presuming that they're not alive anymore. And I always think of her. Yeah. I think she'd be a fun guest.
She would be a blast. I think she'd be. She would certainly shock people and maybe even pull some things. Yeah, there was even some rumors that she was sort of you mentioned, a charlatan, maybe sort of a phony in some regard because of some of the seances that she had performed, and she had an odd character who she hung out with too. I forget his name right now. Some guy who she traveled with, maybe but they were sort of, really regarded. Like you said, she had this sort of black and white exposure to people. Either people loved her or hated her.
Yeah.
And,
well, I think I'm speaking for myself, it is very difficult, and you see this with a lot of the mediums who, in the Weiser book of Occult Detectives, the oldest story in here is from 1855, and it really corresponds with the rise of spiritualism.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
And even somebody who is a gifted medium, a gifted psychic, it is very hard. People are not jukeboxes.
Mm-hmm.
And so, you stick the quarter in and, like, the prophecy comes out.
Right, it's not Zoltan.
Right, exactly. And I think that pressure on people who maybe, genuinely did have genuine talents,
mm-hmm.
but maybe couldn't just spit it out as often. Once people are paying for it, and it's a performance, and it's on demand, it changes it.
The stakes are much higher. Yeah, it's really...
Well, just because somebody fakes it sometimes doesn't mean they're not real at other times, I think.
That's true. And then I guess the real question is, how do you discern which is which?
Right.
And that comes down, I think that would come down, in my case, it would come down to the accuracy. I've dealt with mediums and psychics before, and I always enter into them with a sort of an authentic, pure kind of backdrop, so that I know that they're going to be legitimate. And then when I enter into it, if they start saying things that no one else would know but me, then I say, okay, it's legitimate.
Yeah, yeah.
And it's too bad because people sometimes, I think what happened is that many people, and perhaps many of the people in your book as well, have been in some ways minimized by the Hollywood luster of what this realm looks like. It's sort of the woo-woo factor. I hate even using that term, but that people fall into that. But you are deeply immersed into it, and I'm cast with the same
Purveyors of woo, yeah.
Purveyors of woo. What a great expression. I love that.
Yeah.
What do you do for a living? Put that on your income tax this year. Purveyor of woo. Let's see how far you get. And they'll say, we may have to do an audit on this one.
Yeah.
A live audit, as a matter in fact. But it does give you that, that is where people fall down. I do think that there's sort of a Hollywoodization of that type of person that is not fair, because there are legitimate people who definitely have talents.
And in the best case scenario, cinematic or Hollywood or television depictions have to be visual.
Yeah.
You have to see it, and that's not how it works. And then I think that sets up false expectations. And I because of my encyclopedias, because of my 5,000 spells and my witchcraft, I get a lot of email, and people, very sincerely, I didn't get the smoke and lights and, fireworks that, you see on Buffy the Vampire Slayer or Charmed, and do I think it worked? And yeah, at home you're not getting that. If you don't have a lighting department, you're not getting that. You don't have those special effects.
Yeah.
And I think it's, so at the end, the real people are actually trying, Hollywood is attempting to show you something that does have a basis in reality, and then the people who, the actual practitioners, are trying to emulate what is seen in movies to sort of satisfy their clients, and you get these very, very strange.
You do, and that's where I think Madame Blavatsky suffered, because she was sort of lumped in with that in some cases. But I think that she had some fairly significant patrons and people who followed her. And
Edison, Krishnamurti, know.
These people were they're not small people.
No.
It's interesting that you chose that. I mean, I that one jumped out right off the bat just because I know of Madame Blavatsky so well. But the idea here is a sort of you've taken a common denominator, which would be sort of the occult, and you've added in a dash of, like making up a potion here. You've added in a dash of detective work and mystery solving, and it brings together into a genre almost of mystical mysteries, I guess, for lack of better words, and it's really interesting.
Yeah. Well, I like detective stories in general.
Mm-hmm.
When I'm in between books, people always say, what are you reading? And they want me to come up with, Helena Blavatsky. and in fact, what I read between books are murder mysteries. Mm-hmm. I know my Hercule Poirot. That's my palate cleanser. I enjoy the puzzle, and I like these mystical mysteries. And they're different kinds, and I like the fluidity of the genre. Sometimes there's a genuine supernatural, for lack of a better word, mystery that needs to be solved. And sometimes you just have an open-minded detective who just finds themselves, confronted with a puzzle. And, I think, Dale Cooper on Twin Peaks is an example of someone who, confronted with a puzzle, will use every possible means to solve the mystery, to solve the crime.
It also gives the authors a whole new wellspring of areas to go. I mean, when you open it up to the supernatural, anything goes. I mean, you can have anything happen you want to have happen.
And well, that historically has been the criticism of this genre. Historically, that has been the criticism because, in the 1920s and the 1930s, and I talk about this in the introduction to the book, this is sort of the lowest of mysteries. It was a very disreputable genre because, first of all, it was assumed that the occult is nonsense. And second of all, even if it isn't nonsense, it was presumed that the authors were lazy. They weren't coming up with clever solutions. They were just saying, "Oh yes, I dreamt it, and I knew what happened."
Or a vision appeared, or something like that. Yeah, right.
Yes, yes, exactly. There's one of the detectives in.
So they may have seen that as a lazy way out. Perhaps.
Yes.
Yeah. Or a cheap cop out. Yeah. I see.
As opposed to
a real
Sherlock Holmes,
yes,
an Arthur
exactly.
Conan Doyle story. Although there is an occult detective.
There is one of his in here. I saw that. Yeah.
Yes.
And he makes perfect sense, as does and interestingly enough, and I'm sure you have a good answer for this. I'm surprised that we don't see Edgar Allan Poe in here.
Because he doesn't really have an occult detective, and because this was a book with a tight focus. There is an Edgar Allan Poe story in the predecessor, in the Weiser Book of Fantastic and Forgotten. This one, it had to be an occult detective stories. I have 13 different occult detectives. So, I could write. I could easily do another 2 or 3 or 4 compilations. There's that much material.
Interesting.
But I love Edgar Allan Poe.
Well, he seems to be. I think people would respond to the sort of the celebrity quality of Poe, and just because of the fact that they figure he's bound to be in here somewhere because of his reach. And,
but he didn't. The interesting thing with that, he's not, because he did not write occult detective stories very specifically, and of course he's credited with. Many people credit him as the person who formalized the English language detective story.
Sort of defined it.
He is the founder of detective stories, but not necessarily occult detective stories. But the interesting thing is that there's so mysteriously,
right?
There's so much speculation and fictional portrayals of what happened to Edgar Allan Poe, and some of those verge into occult detective territory.
Yeah, because it makes more sense because of the mystery involved, again, because of the sort of this great unknown of what happened, and it leads us into an area where we're allowed to speculate more, our imaginations. And I think the real true quality of any art form is the engagement of the purveyor of the art. In other words, when you are when you're actively engaged in a painting or actively engaged in listening to a piece of music where you have to sort of fill in what you think is there, then you become part of the process. I think it's the same when it comes to literature, where you have to sort of put yourself into that. That sort of makes it more immersive kind of experience, I think.
And I think I think good fiction, you create a world.
Yeah.
You create it. It's not just like a throwaway story.
It should be. It's a world unto its own. It should be.
Yeah. That the reader can enter into.
Yeah, exactly. And that's what I love about literature, because it allows you to, with words, you can form your own idea of the characters. Now, I, for example, hate going to see a movie unless I've read the book first, because I want to have that image of my character in my head before I go to a movie. And oftentimes they're good, sometimes they're not good. But that's the sort of the conundrum I find myself in.
Yeah. And sometimes if I really like a book, I don't want to see the movie.
I agree.
Because I have it in my head.
It's going to ruin it for you. Well, they ruin the
Yeah.
characters sometimes, or they alter the plot in a way that's not as authentic or as believable.
Well, you lose your own perspective on it.
Yeah, and it's through a different lens. It's a different
Yeah.
lens altogether. You're sort of getting a different take. You're getting the director's take, his idea, what it should be like, what the character is supposed to be like, and it can go wildly astray, I think, in many cases.
I think so too.
When you were compiling this, what do you use to as your source for compiling? What sort of a lens do you look through? I mean, you've got to do a lot of research in order to find these stories, right? I mean,
I love the research. The research is the fun part, because you get to read these great, and they are great stories. Whether you could just read them as fun literature, even if you're not interested.
That's true. I can see that.
They do
exactly.
stand on their own. One, with this one, I was looking, very specifically, a specific genre. There had to be some sort of an occult detective in there. Two, it had to be a good story, because nothing else, that's the bottom line. I read everything out loud. I read all my own work out loud. That's how I know whether I've made mistakes or if I've written it correctly.
It's a good practice. It's actually really good practice.
So, these stories had to hold up to me, and whoever I live with also, they have to listen to me sometimes. I force people to listen to me.
That's all right.
These stories range in terms of publication date from 1855 to 1922, I think, is the most recent one, a Dion Fortune story. And, it's a little bit of a problematic era. I wanted these stories to be enjoyable. It's not an academic book.
No.
And for that reason, I really, and I do talk about this in the intro also, I didn't want anything that was, there's a lot of racism. There's a lot of casual racism.
Oh, yeah.
A lot of
based
casual racism, casual homophobia, casual anti-Semitism.
So they're not very contemporary in that regard.
Yeah, no.
And there are
certain authors, there are certain authors that it's hard to find a story because, some of them are hateful, and some of them are just dropping these words. Maybe that was fashionable at the time, but it's not now. And I didn't want, and as you're reading, speaking for myself, sometimes you're reading and you're enjoying the story, and then you get to like a sentence or a word, and it's like a slap in the face. And I did not want the readers to experience that.
Yeah, and so that narrowed your search down considerably. Because
so, I'm going to be honest with you, that was the hardest thing, because
I can see that.
I kept eliminating stories.
Yeah, I totally get that, because I can see that, because I think based on the time that they were written and the tenor of the times and the tone of what was going on, I could easily see that being a limitation, and you have to chop them off the block at that point, because they're just not, they're going to offend somebody. It's kind of hard to set something up like that within the context of the time that they were written and make them into the time of today. I think it's a difficult bridge to cross without getting complicated or almost embracing what they're saying.
I felt that I wanted to reproduce the stories as they were written, so I can't get into the thing that they did with Nancy Drew, where they just revised the stories so they would be more palatable. These stories are as they were published. At the same time, when I say it's not an academic book, if I were writing the Encyclopedia of Occult Detectives, then you would have to include this material, and you would have to discuss
from a historical standpoint, right?
Yeah, from a historical standpoint,
and you would couch
can't avoid it.
You'd couch it in that kind of phraseology. You'd say, "Listen, this was written back before the Civil War. Racism was a different story back then than it is today. Don't expect to look at these through the lens of 2017." When they were written, 18.
What was socially acceptable then is no longer socially, thankfully, no longer socially acceptable.
Right, and
that
means we've made some progress.
Yeah.
There's a glimmer of hope there.
I wanted it to be fun and enjoyable, and not leave that kind of little bitterness, which sometimes, I speak from experience. You you're reading, and then they kind of ruin it for you.
Yeah, it is. What I love about
yeah.
compilations, and this is a great one, is 13 stories, right? 13? Yep, 13.
Yeah, 13. Yeah.
13 stories is that you get a wide range
The
of...
witching number.
Yeah, I know it. You get a wide range of scenarios. You get a wide range of voices, and it's a nice variety that sort of carries you along very nicely through this, and you're sort of in this realm. I love a book like this for when I travel, because I feel like I can pick up a story at any point in time if I have half an hour in an airport or whatever to read through it and get that sort of that little jolt of that interesting subject that you love. And when you have that in a book like this, they have a whole another element, especially when you introduce the supernatural. I mean, there's plenty of detective compilations that are out there, but the occult, sort of not a disclaimer, but the occult descriptor, adds a whole new element to it. They're like some of these people are regular people, regular guys who stumble upon sort of this supernatural realm of, why is this happening to me? I'm a regular guy, and all of a sudden, boom, you're in this weird world where things are happening. And they're told quite effectively through these voices.
A lot of these stories, I would say most of these stories, were originally published in magazines back in the day when there was no internet and there was no television, and
that was entertainment.
And that was the entertainment, and they had to be entertainment. So they're, some of them are older, and people don't have the patience in the beginning, because it's a more leisurely style of writing than we have now.
It's a little more complex, I think.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But there's a lot more descriptive material because they kind of had to. But once you get into them, they're fun.
Yeah. Well, they have a great sense of. I have a sort of a childlike thrill when I read them. I think that's what it brings back to me. Is that there's sort of this, ghost story around the campfire kind of thing.
Yeah.
And I love that. It's a fun thing. It brings back a sort of that childhood memory of what that's like to be out camping and telling ghost stories around a fire. And I think it's the fact that it's vintage. People, I think, would do well to understand the shift in the tone and the language and all that. It shows in many ways what we're missing today, I would say. It also shows what we had back then and what we could learn from those times back then, especially with regard to structure, syntax. I mean, we live in such a fast-paced world where things are being, abbreviated left and right.
Yeah.
And to have the full thing here, I think it's a very enriching kind of experience.
I appreciate beautiful writing.
Yeah.
And in some cases, many of these stories are really written beautifully. And I, just on a literary level, I really appreciate that. And, the other side of it is, and not with all of these stories, because these stories are 13 stories, different occult detectives, different authors. There's no reproductions here. Each story has either a different author or a pair of authors. These stories were written before the Witchcraft Act, the last Witchcraft Act in the UK, was repealed, and that act was that you could not publish any material that could be interpreted as promoting witchcraft or glorifying. Or
when was this repealed?
It was repealed in the 1950s. And I'm not looking at the book, the actual year is in here. Well, because we evolved. There was a law in Canada against witchcraft that was just taken off the books this year.
That is funny.
If you, as a card reader, whenever you move to a new place in the United States, you have to investigate, are you allowed to read cards in this jurisdiction? Because there are places where, you can only read cards in the context of a church fair.
And that was probably to protect people against fraud or fakes or,
Maybe. I think, I think it's prejudice against witches or prejudice against the occult and control.
Or fear.
Attempt to control or fear, all of the above.
Yeah.
I think to protect people, but also control.
Yeah, I can see that.
And because of that, though, people who, like me, people who ended up writing nonfiction about the magical arts, like Dion Fortune, like Gerald Gardner, would put their information in the form of fiction.
Mm-hmm.
And so if you read, for instance, there's a Dion Fortune story in here which features her detective, Dr. Taverner, who was actually based on her own teacher, her mentor and her teacher. There's actually, you can just read it as a story, and it's a suspenseful story, but there's actually a lot of occult information there in between the lines, and there are several stories like that. So it's sort of it's a nice way to learn things.
Yeah, no, it certainly is. It really is. It's got a lot of interesting characters. I think you pick up more here than you'd be surprised to see how much you pick up as a result of reading this. We're speaking today with Judika Illes. She's the editor and the person who did all the research in compiling the Wiser book of Occult Detectives, 13 Stories of Supernatural Sleuthing. I encourage you to look it up. It's a highly interesting book. It's got a lot of great character to it. It's the kind of book I think that people would hang on to. It's not just something that you're going to read and then toss out. I think you're going to hang on to it because you're going to want to go back to these stories.
I hope so.
And I think it makes great sense. We'll take a quick break here right now. I'll be back in a few minutes. In the meantime, I encourage you to look up the Wiser book of Occult Detectives, 13 Stories of Supernatural Sleuthing, edited and introduced by Judika Illes. We'll be back in a few seconds after a quick commercial break, and we'll finish our conversation with Judika, so hang in there.
What is your destiny? Where are you going? What is your real purpose? Do you know? Do you want to know? Of course you do. It's your duty to yourself. We are all here for a reason, and we all have great potential. Discover all of this and more with a professional astrology reading. My name is Chris Flisher, and I can help you. Discover your strengths and work on your weaknesses, and live your life to its fullest capacity. Based on your birthday, birthplace, and birth time, an authentic astrology reading will allow you to live your life to the fullest and reveal your true purpose. Only real astrology can give you real information. It is your destiny, and it is your path. Write me at chris@chrisflisher.com and book a reading today, or call me at 978-393-1036. That's 978-393-1036. www.chrisflisher.com.
Astrology is the science of spirit, and it can serve as an invaluable aid in making the difficult choices in life and seeking truth in all the directions we choose. It holds the potential to allow each of us to evolve to our highest potential. It is the logic of the universe, the code of existence, and the pathway to true wisdom. It is our duty to draw from it the instructions for our lives and to live them to our fullest potential. As the great wheel turns, we are best prepared when we are best informed.
As the world shrinks and our barriers come down, diverse cultures are striving for harmony, balance, and peace. To ease the transition, we need to expand with color, light, and tolerance. Now, you can become a global citizen and embrace the color and clear spirit with the divine artwork of the mandala. Mandalas are a timeless artistic offering for creating unity, harmony, and peace. My name is Chris Flisher, and I've spent years creating mandalas, and they are now available online at www.turningofthewheel.com. Come and experience the world of color, form, and function with t-shirts, coffee mugs, note cards, and limited edition prints. These vibrant, lively paintings and products express optimism, oneness, and spiritual balance for all who use them. www.turningofthewheel.com. That's www.turningofthewheel.com. And enter a world of possibility and color.
Okay, welcome back to Turning of the Wheel. We're talking today with Judika Illes. She's the editor and the introducer, if that's the word. If it isn't, that's okay. Of the Wiser book of Occult Detectives, 13 Stories of Supernatural Sleuthing. So, what I noticed was that there's a certain time span, roughly the middle 1800s to the early 1900s, 1920s, when this is where you've placed this sort of look, this, you put the groove down, the needle down the record in this area of time. Why is it this time? Is this time more fervent with this type of literature, or is it just more?
No, I mean, at this point, this literature, this is the time frame where this literature is disreputable. In recent years, the concept of the occult detective, the genre, has become incredibly popular, and it's so popular people don't realize it's a genre. You know, the X-Files, Twin Peaks, Scooby-Doo, Foucault's Pendulum, you know, Buffy and Angel. You could keep going. Constantine. I could literally just start reeling off
very
names
popular genre,
of books and movies and video games and the Dresden Files, and people love this genre, and it's as if it just, you know, has always been here. But these are the stories and the authors in this compilation, this book, are the people who really created the genre, who set the groundwork for the genre at a time when it wasn't particularly popular, and they weren't getting tons of money for it, or even getting, you know, praise, or, you know, it was you know, I think in some cases it was a labor of love.
Yeah.
I talked before about how beautifully written some of these stories are. They didn't have to be, because many of these stories were first published in pulp magazines, and they probably could have just thrown something at them and they would have been published, because they were perceived as very disposable. I mean, I really liked what you said before about holding on to the book, because these stories were originally perceived as disposable as a daily newspaper. You read it, you enjoyed it, you tossed it. The way, you know, some people read comic books, although clearly, you know, other people are collectors and scholars of comics, and I think the same thing happened with this. And I also liked that, you know, how is my book different from other compilations? And there really aren't. I think somebody else is coming out with an occult detective compilation now, but there aren't a lot of them. And the stories that have been published are often introduced by people who like the stories, but simultaneously mock them. And you know,
interesting.
I mean, it sort of shocks me, because I have sort of paid good money for compilations of stories that are otherwise out of print, and, you know, read the introductions where, you know, the stories are mocked, or the authors are mocked, or, you know, the occult is mocked, and I treat the topic and the authors with respect, and I thought that was important.
Why would you think that they would sort of put them up, you know, build me up, Buttercup, just to let me down? Why would they? Why would they do that? I mean, why would they take
Because I think there are people who enjoy the stories, but are also maybe a little bit embarrassed, because, you know. Well,
it sort of shows your hand. It shows that you're open to this as a concept.
Purveyors of woo.
Purveyors of woo. There we go. Once again,
people don't. You know, it's a mocking term. You know. You know, I don't believe in the woo, or I don't. You know, everybody wants to be rational and kind of above it all, and, you know,
but these
distance
things, as
from
you mentioned, these things do go through cycles, and the fact that
Yeah.
And the cycle that this is in, astrologically speaking, would be a Neptune cycle, because Neptune rules the subconscious, and it's where we see illusion and delusion with regard to astrology and how it plays out in the general, you know, backdrop of society. And Neptune is currently in Pisces, and it takes about 164 years for Neptune to go around the whole zodiac. So when it returns, so we look back 164 years ago from today, we're right smack dab in the same pocket of time that Blavatsky was in, and all these other people.
So interesting.
Yeah, so you see this influence again, and we see it in our current society more than anything else. And I'm not going to digress on this fact, but this is an important fact to remember. When Donald Trump walked out into the stage in the Republican National Convention, he walked out into a bank of fog with totally obscured, and there's no one who's better at the master of the illusion and delusion than he, and yet here he is in this position when we have this planetary alignment of this same thing. And that's all I'm going to say about it, but that is no small coincidence, is what I would argue.
No, I don't believe I don't believe in coincidence.
And I think that this is a very the fact that these kind of stories are resurfacing makes perfect sense right now, because I think people are desperate for the escape factor that they provide, which I think is not something can be dismissed, because it is a certain form of,
of course,
take me away, Calgon, please get me out of this world, and so I think there's that quality, but also there's this drive for, I think we see it with the lack of, or maybe a diminished focus on organized religion, and a veering towards this sort of, what else is there that we can believe in kind of philosophy that leaves us to this kind of realm, which I think is pretty accurate and current. We are looking for answers, and we can't rule out the occult as a way to find answers.
I feel very blessed to have had the opportunity to put this compilation together, because I myself am an occultist,
of course,
and
of the
writer.
highest order,
and these authors, and some of them were just writing these stories for money. So not everybody, they're the different authors, and I have descriptions of them, are coming to this material from different angles. But authors like Dion Fortune and Algernon Blackwood and Blavatsky, they really are, and Arthur Conan Doyle, for that matter, who was a very devout spiritualist, they are deserving of respect, not just for their skill, but also for the thought that they put into these stories.
And in some cases, the courage. I'd say,
yes. Yes, absolutely.
It takes something to write this. You have to be able to go out there and say that, as you well know, if you're a purveyor of woo, you have to be courageous in that regard, because you're going to get people are going to look at you, sideways.
Always.
And,
yes.
until you come through and you're correct one time, and then they're like, oh, well, maybe I will listen, It's funny because, I run into this all the time with astrology. People never want to admit that they follow it, or they don't. They sort of do it secretively because they don't want to be considered to be a woo person, but yet 98% of people know what their sun sign is, and they are very keenly aware of what astrology is all about, and they actually read it and all that stuff, but they just won't perhaps admit it. But I run into people at parties, and I tell them what I do, and they say, oh well, I'm such and such, and then of course they want me to tell them something about them to sort of legitimize it. Right. And you get into these sort of situations. But I think the basic premise of all of this is that it requires a certain amount of belief and a certain amount of faith. And I don't use faith in the conventional term. I use faith in the sense of, I have a sense that this might be right, and I'm willing to delve into this to discover more.
I think you also have to trust in your own experiences.
Yeah, exactly.
Where if you have psychic experiences, or you study astrology, or one of the other arts, numerology, and you recognize validity, and then somebody comes along and why are you reading that nonsense? To not be quick to dismiss your own experiences.
And I think anybody who's ever had even a synchronistic event, anybody who has a strongly connected synchronistic event in their lives, it does give you pause. There's no question about it. It gives you pause.
Absolutely.
And you say, wow, somebody else is in charge here. This stuff doesn't just happen. There's too many coincidences here that line up with time and place and date and, events that are just mind-blowing. I've had many of them myself, and I don't discount them. And I would even go so far as to say, even though I'm a devout believer in all this stuff, I've always been a skeptic at some point in my life. The thing about it is that by being a skeptic, you don't become a blind follower. You're not just taking it rote. You're allowing yourself to say, I am going to toss this around in my head for a bit, see if this works, see if that works. And I think that being a skeptic is a healthy thing in this regard. I think you enter into the world of the occult with a healthy dose of skepticism. Then you get those epiphanies that sort of say, okay, well, I'm skeptic, but still, this is pretty darn good.
I think we probably should approach everything with a little dose of skepticism. Not just the occult.
Of course.
Everything.
Everything,
People are
of course.
very quick to,
to be a blind follower. My father, interestingly enough, was a minister and growing up, so he obviously did not like anything having to do with the occult. But one thing I did take away from him when I was growing up, even though I went the opposite direction, was that he said, the strongest believer is he who doubts. And that's one of the things I always stuck with me, because it just shows you're not taking things on, you're not drinking the Kool-Aid, so to speak.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely.
And I think the occult, it has that quality to it. I think anything that you talk about. But you know what I want to ask you? I want to ask you some questions about some of the stories and what you found to be some, surprises to you. And obviously we talked about Blavatsky, but there must be some other surprises here that sort of just caught you. And I mentioned to you, this must have been an exhaustive task to find all these stories and to parse down or to boil down the ones that were right for you. That must have been a difficult task.
It's actually, it was exhilarating.
Oh, I can imagine.
It was exhilarating. And if I found a story that matched all the criteria I had, I saved them. And there's a little bit of a puzzle aspect because every book there's only a fixed amount of pages. You have to be able to squeeze everything into a set amount of pages.
Of course.
And, some of my favorite occult detective stories are novella length rather than stories.
Okay.
And
so they're eliminated.
I tried. There's a story called Ancient Sorceries. I have green tea in here instead. Was it green tea?
Yeah.
But that's not I have...
Sheridan Le Fanu?
No, it's the Algernon Blackwood. I have A Victim of Higher Space with John Silence, but I really, really wanted Ancient Sorceries. And, instead of green tea, I wanted Carmilla, which is, quite a famous vampire story, which also features Dr. Hecelius. And in all truth, Dr. Hecelius is in green tea more than he is in Carmilla, but I love Carmilla and I love Ancient Sorceries. But if I had included them, and I tried to juggle it, there wouldn't be 13 stories. It would be like 5.
Right.
I don't know.
Because you're limited by page count, yeah.
Yeah, and I just don't know. I don't know. Would people be happy with that? So anybody listening, Carmilla and Ancient Sorceries, if you haven't read them, you should.
When you take an author such as you've mentioned there, when you take an author such as that, and they have a character who is their
right,
whatever their hero,
and in many cases, these occult detectives appear in more than one story.
But they've got to have a consistent thread. They've got to be character has to remain the same, just like Poirot.
Yeah, and they do.
Sherlock Holmes does.
Yes. Dr. Taverner, for instance, Dion Fortune. There is a whole series of Dr. Taverner stories. The same with various stories in this book, and it's when I say I could do another couple volumes, I very easily could, because not all of the stories, some of them are one-offs, but in several cases the detective appears in multiple stories, and that's a fun thing to read. I'm
really curious as to how you actually find these stories, because this is not, I don't think this is an easy task.
I was not unfamiliar with the topic. And
I'm
read
sure
a lot.
Yeah, I know, but still.
I read a lot, and I read mysteries. I mean, there's a story here...
These are tucked away, though. These are they're from 1914, and they're not out in the public,
No, but I mean, I've not to sound, egotistical, but I'm a well-read person. I try to be a well-read person. I was an English major.
Yeah.
So
this stuff comes naturally to you.
And I'm a researcher. So I started digging, and I wanted to, if possible, have some women authors and some women detectives, because I thought it would make for a better, more well-rounded book.
Of course.
And so I had my eye out for those things, and several, I was familiar with several of the stories before. The first story in here, which is the oldest, from 1855, is a story by the author Fitzjames O'Brien called The Pot of Tulips. And that story, Fitzjames O'Brien is, if you like this type of fiction, he is most famous as he's considered one of the founders of modern science fiction. He was one of H.P. Lovecraft's. He's got a story called The Diamond Lens, which is a sci-fi story. But I had read The Pot of Tulips years ago, and I remembered it, and I loved it, because I have spent, back in the day when I had corporate jobs, I worked in Midtown Manhattan. And I am very, very familiar with that whole area of New York City in the 30s and the 40s. And The Pot of Tulips takes place. The story is written at 1855, and it is already in 18. If it takes place at 1855, the narrator is telling a story of his youth. So this is already, several decades in the past. And he talks about, living in what is now Midtown Manhattan when it was a place you went for the summer. It was a summer home.
Oh, Midtown. I see. Wow, interesting.
And that has always stayed with me because, it's my hometown, New York.
Mm-hmm.
And that notion that the wilds of Midtown, you would go there to get away from the teeming city that was downtown. It stayed with me.
It just seems out of sorts with each other because we think of New York as gigantic.
I must have read that story, I don't know how many years ago, but that little detail always stayed with me. And part of researching these books is just immersing yourself in the fiction. And, I have a lot of old out-of-print compilations of fiction.
Yeah.
I go to used bookstores, I go to library sales, and I find them.
Mm-hmm. Interesting. Did you ever stumble across or consider the work of Roald Dahl? Did he ever fall under this realm at all?
I have written about Roald Dahl's books and others, but this is it is very specifically occult detective.
Right, and he doesn't have anything that strays into that area.
Right. I do talk about some of his books, and I wrote a book called The Weiserfield Guide to Witches, and also in my Encyclopedia of Witchcraft. So although the stories aren't reproduced, there are entries for them in the books.
Mm-hmm.
Those are nonfiction books. But this one, as Fantastic and Forgotten, I was given the title and told to go write this book and curate this book. And that's a very loose category, Fantastic and Forgotten.
It is.
I found, and right away I went to Marie Corelli, who is an author I remembered from my youth. And Marie Corelli, in her heyday, was, possibly the best-selling author, more popular than Arthur Conan Doyle. Queen Victoria read her, everybody read her. And, now nobody knows Marie Corelli, or very few people.
Mm-hmm.
So right away I honed in on that, but Fantastic and Forgotten is, very, very loose. Occult Detectives, every single story has an occult detective in it.
It has to, and that's the premise.
It has to.
Yeah, that's
if there was, we talked about before, how did I select the stories?
Mm-hmm.
If there's no occult detective,
it's not a story. It's not in the book.
It's not in this book.
Yeah.
And in fact, if you look at the table of contents, I didn't just include the story. I included the name of the occult detective.
Right. I love that. I think that's a nice touch because it really gives you an idea of who they're speaking with. And it is a very limited range of stories because most of these writers, we all think of Arthur Conan Doyle and Sherlock Holmes as being his foil, or Hercule Poirot being the foil. And these are these characters that sort of carry this through. But we also see them, like you mentioned, some of the popular culture we see now with Buffy the Vampire Slayer and all these things. They have these same characters, and their characters remain powerful enough to carry the stories through, and yet they find themselves in these unusual situations, which just juices up the...
And that's an art of telling a story, being able to maintain a consistent character.
Oh, it's very difficult, I think, because you've got to find them in different places, and you have to keep...
they have to take on a life of their own, and they have to be real, at least to the author.
And it has to be believable across the different situations you're in, which I think is, in some ways, is a task.
Well, in the same way that, if you know somebody, a real-life flesh-and-blood person, you have somebody in your life, and you know how they behave, and then all of a sudden they behave in very uncharacteristic ways. It's very disturbing.
Right. If someone acts out of character, like, why is this person doing this? Right, exactly.
Yes, what happened?
Yeah, what happened? And all of your...
Who are you?
All your preconceived...
What have you done to my friend?
All your preconceived notions of that person are suddenly rewritten.
Yes. Yeah. And so, in this book, you have stories like there's the detective Thomas Carnacki, who is a very athletic occultist. Mm-hmm. Thomas Carnacki is, he's very physically solving crimes, and he's an inventor, and he creates gadgets, as opposed to we have the Morris Claw character who is a sex rumors detective, who is the dream detective, and he goes to the scene of the crime and goes to sleep and dreams the solution. And so, you know, they're very, very distinct, and they have lives, and, you know, in some ways they're so, Thomas Carnecki this is one of the original stories by his creator, William Hope Hodgson, but after, you know, he was very popular in the same way that Sherlock Holmes is popular, and in the same way that Sherlock Holmes, you know, people are still writing Sherlock Holmes stories. People are still writing Thomas Carnecki stories.
Interesting.
Thomas Carnecki has lived past the life of his creator. You know, he lives in London, and he's a bachelor, and he has dinner parties.
Kind of like James Bond.
Yes. Versus, you know, Morris Claw has, you know, his daughter, and they're kind of mysterious, and they're you know, they're a little ethnic. We don't really know what, but they're, you know, they're world travelers, and they're, you know, they're different types of people.
Yeah. Did you find that the people and the characters that they created lived on in other stories beyond this, or did you find many of these to be just one-offs? I'm sure that's most of them are series. Okay, so these characters appear.
The Pot of Tulips, the one that takes place in Midtown Manhattan, the detective Harry Escott appears in 2 stories and 2 stories only, but the author died very young. He volunteered to fight in the Civil War.
Oh gosh, mistake number 1.
He was a social activist. He came from Ireland. You know, he probably didn't have to, but he fought on the Union side and was quite, you know, and was injured, and not even injured that badly, but he wasn't treated in time, and possibly wasn't treated
properly, and then that was the end of him. Yeah, right. Exactly.
And that was the end of him. And I wonder if he had lived, you know, and he traveled in the same circles as Walt Whitman when he came to America. He was quite the you know, bohemian around town. Had he lived, would there have been another half a dozen? And that's the earliest story in here. He's not the most famous, and people often forget. I put them in date order so you could see the progression.
Yeah, I like that. I like that a lot.
Well, I had to organize it, and that sort of, to me, made sense.
I think so. I mean, there's no other real bead that you can draw out of this. I mean, they all have the common occult detective quality to them, so they're all going to be in there. But and it's not cumulative, so it's nice to see that one thread.
But I mean, some of the characters are at least in like half a dozen. There are a couple here that are not. The Arthur Conan Doyle story, which does not feature Sherlock Holmes, it features an occultist named Lionel Dacre, who is very decadent and lives in Paris. You know, that's, I think, a one-off. I don't think there is another Lionel Dacre story, possibly because everybody was demanding Sherlock Holmes.
Right, and he could only carry on to make so many characters.
I mean, there's only so many hours in a day to write.
Yeah, and this was all done by hand, of course, back at the time. So much different. Yeah. Do you find that the style holds up well today? I mean, do you think people will recognize it and be able to embrace it?
Yeah, but I mean, that was also I deliberately I wanted stories that were good stories. That was
ultimately that's what's going to carry this. The show.
So I mean, there are stories that, not in this book, but there are certainly stories in existence that read very old or archaic or are not.
The language is
beautifully
different.
Written.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah. So if you were doing this exhaustive book on Occult Detectives, you would then start to include those also, but
I mean, when you think about the time that they were written and the sort of the mindset of the people, and this brings me back to that sort of astrological connection of the time and this sense of Neptune, which is very much of a part of this whole backdrop. It makes me wonder if they, these were probably more often than not, like you say, written for magazines and sold as just one story for a paycheck, and that's it. And then they were never really included in compilations at the time, right?
No, some of them ended up being published as books, and I do include all of the way this book is formatted. For those who are listening, there is an introduction to the topic, and then before each of the 13 stories, I have a little introduction that'll tell you something about the author and about the story and about the detective. And in some cases, they were published in books.
Mm-hmm.
These books are often out of print now. They're not necessarily easy to find. Some of the stories, some of them are public domain, and you'll find them online. But others are quite difficult to find unless you go looking. Because I'm thinking of the John Silence stories, for example, which were quite popular at the time. But if you wanted to search out all the John Silence stories, well, you'd have to go buy different books.
Right. I think what the critical piece here is the filter through which these stories arrive, which is you. You're the unique character in the whole backdrop here, because without your knowledge of the occult and your broad range of English background and all of your sort of fascination with these esoteric topics, they would not come together under this realm. This would be very difficult to find.
It would be a different book, yes. And it is a Weiser publication, and Weiser is
that's what they do.
Primarily a publisher of esoteric literature, and so between the compiler and the publisher, I think these stories are treated a little bit differently than they usually are.
Yeah, and that makes sense. I think that does make sense. There's no reason why that holds up. I think it's a fascinating collection of interesting people. We see some familiar names. We see Madame Blavatsky of the Theosophical Society is in here. We see Arthur Conan Doyle, of course, of Sherlock Holmes fame. But I think the idea and the underlying theme here is this fascination with the otherworldly qualities that the occult brings to it. And I think when you mix detective and that, whatever that means, and you add into it the occult quality, you get a mix that is just, it's a fascinating thing for, reading around the campfire, for nothing else. It's a great area. It's a great combination of two mediums.
If you think about the original meaning of the word occult, it's secret. It's the secret.
Yeah, it's nothing.
And what do detectives do? They investigate mysteries and secrets.
Yes.
So it's really perfect.
It is. It's a marriage made in heaven, for lack of a better word.
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, we've run out of time, unfortunately, but I want to let people know this is a fascinating book. It's called The Weiser Book of Occult Detectives, 13 Stories of Supernatural Sleuthing. And my guest today has been Judika Illes. She's written quite a few books on the occult in the past, and is probably best known for your 5,000.
Yes.
Your 5,000. Spells, which is interesting. Anybody who wants to get back at their neighbor or whatever, you can find it here. She's the author of the Encyclopedia of 5,000 Spells, Encyclopedia of Witchcraft, and the Encyclopedia of Spirits, as well as the Fantastic and the Forgotten, and, of course, this latest one, the Occult Detectives. And interesting, if you have any interest at all in any of the topics that I talk about in the show, I think you'll be drawn to this book, and I think you'll find it to be something that's well worth keeping, because it's got all the qualities that make great stories great. It's got the suspense, it's got the great writing, but then you add in the detective quality, that mystery, and then you add in the other thing, the other ingredient, the occult, and you've got quite a heady stew of intrigue and interesting stuff. So thanks so much for coming on today, Judika. It's always fun to talk to you.
Always a pleasure. Thank you so much.
And do you have a website? You have a website. Well, you do, don't
My
you?
name.
Your name.
www.judikailles.com.
Judika Illes, JUDIKAILLES.com. Judika Illes is where you can find her. And I encourage you to look her up. Don't inundate her with emails and questions, but more importantly,
you can inundate me. I can only answer as much as I can answer.
Right. Find her books instead. That's where you'll find the real Judika.
Thank you.
Thanks, Judika. It's great talking to you. Again, The Weiser Book of Occult Detectives, 13 Stories of Supernatural Sleuthing, edited and introduced by Judika Illes. Thank you, Judika, so much for coming on today. It's been great talking to you.
Thank you, Chris.
Okay, bye-bye.
You've been listening to Turning of the Wheel with your host, Chris Flisher. To schedule a reading with me or to order artwork, you may visit my website at www.turningofthewheel.com. That's www.turningofthewheel.com. Or you can call me at 978-393-1036. Thank you. And as always, Be open to possibilities.